It was early morning in a small town of Centerville in Louisiana, United States, when an emergency service operator received a call from an alarmed citizen.
911, what are you reporting?
The woman complained that she had just received news of an explosion in a nearby chemical plant and ongoing efforts to evacuate the area. Almost instantly, the social media was flooded with eyewitness reports and pictures of the plant engulfed in flames. Soon, videos were posted too.
Yeah, let's just get out of here, huh?
Before long, a screenshot of a CNN webpage appeared confirming the disaster. Finally, videos surfaced of ISIS militants accepting responsibility for the attack. There was only one but. That day, no chemical plant in the United States reported any accidents whatsoever. Thousands of posts, images, videos, and even a fake CNN webpage were part of a meticulously planned information warfare attack. And that's where the clues to the perpetrators of this attack lead. The Russian cities of Novosibirsk, Omsk, Nizhny Novgorod, Yekaterinburg, Samara, and many others. Later, investigators discovered that the attack took over 2 months to plan. Loads of fake content was created, thousands of fake accounts were opened, and special social network trends were developed. Following the attack, the media came to a consensus that Russia's foreign policy towards the West had shifted completely, and its aggressive rhetoric has evolved into a full-scale information war. The War 2020, Russia's information aggression. For the past several years, Russia has fully immersed itself in preparations for a full-scale military conflict with the West. Neither the nature of the upcoming conflict nor its direction are being kept a secret. Scenarios of the occupation of the neighboring countries are being openly polished, and simulations of a nuclear attack on Poland's capital are being performed. The Russian military analyst Alexander Sitin spent more than 10 years working for Russia's Institute of Strategic Research, an institution which has been founded and is being directly supervised by Vladimir Putin. It is one of the think tanks responsible for providing the president with the analysis of current foreign affairs and strategic suggestions on foreign policy.
Здесь в целом страхи, безусловно, оправданы.
There is a good reason to be alarmed. It doesn't mean that the war will break out tomorrow or in the upcoming weeks, and Russian flag will be raised in Vilnius or Tallinn. However, such danger most certainly exists because it is obvious that Kremlin exercises a very aggressive policy. Equally obvious is that the events that took place until now are just the beginning of a larger process, and that Russia's explicit aggression is going to continue. There are different scenarios possible, starting with all kinds of political and economic blackmail and leading to specific acts of military aggression.
According to Sitin, it is very important to note a fact that Russia has already spent years in preparing its population for a large military conflict. A few years ago, the Russian media regarded the war with the West as a distant possibility. Today, it is being portrayed as a certain fact. The apparent cause of the upcoming war has also been made clear. People in Russia are being persuaded that NATO and the United States are not only planning, but are already in the process of mounting an attack on Russia's territory. Even the date of such an alleged attack is known, the year 2020.
Военные НАТО наращивают силы вдоль западных границ России.
В Польше и Прибалтике масштабное наращивание американского военного присутствия. В Прибалтику уже переброшены даже диверсионные подразделения спецслужб США.
В бывших республик Советской Прибалтики и в Польше будут созданы ударные группировки войск.
Крылатые ракеты запустят одновременно с разных направлений. Примерно вот так будет выглядеть атака НАТО.
Литва, Латвия, Эстония и Польша сейчас активно заполняют новыми образцами современного оружия для будущей войны.
Глобальный удар надо разрабатывать.
А что мы? Чем ответим?
Baltic states are impossible to defend, which means that any military force, either American or NATO, is being deployed there only for the offensive purposes.
It has been more than a year now since Russian media has started to develop a story about the Baltic countries being chosen as a ground for an American aggression against Russia. The main objective of such a story can be clearly seen in a report published by yet another Kremlin's think tank, the Center of Systematic Analysis and Forecast. The document, signed by the president of the center, Rostislav Ishchenko, is called On a Necessity of a Preventive Occupation of the Baltic region.
The necessity of preventive occupation of the Baltic region arises not only because of the threat of the invasion, but also as a means to shorten a possible front line in case of need. The overwhelming blow at the Baltic region is necessary in order to eliminate danger to the northern wing of Russia's and Belarus's armed forces. It is also necessary in order to terminate the blockade of Kaliningrad and to prevent military invasion into Russia's territory. In case we are successful in preserving our current positions, pro-Russian political forces could be placed into power in all Baltic states. In the context of downfall of NATO, it would be possible to achieve a special status, providing Russia with the role of guardian of these countries. I often point out how the course of action is being planned in this country. First, some kind of statement is being made publicly by people who do not take any responsibility for what they are saying. It could be Ishchenko, it could be Zhirinovsky or someone similar.
В рамках нашего разговора назовем так, от Ищенко до Жириновского. Он осуществляет некий вброс.
Then the government watches public reaction really closely, inside the country as well as abroad, in this case the Baltic states. What are they especially interested in are the reactions of Russians living in the Baltic states as well as local nationals in terms of how actively they're prepared to fight back.
Готовы этому противостоять. Мы вот сейчас стоим на пороге вот этого процесса. Дальше формируется такой пул общественного мнения.
So they gather up this pool of public opinion, and depending on the results, various projects are being held, such as Crimea, Donetsk, or Lugansk, and similar. If the government determines that the society is not ready to accept such course of action, the idea is discarded until a new opportunity appears.
During 15 years of Putin's reign in the Kremlin, a strict control of public opinion has been implemented, and an immensely powerful propaganda machine has been created as primary weapons of the regime. Zhana Nemtsova's father, the leader of the Russian opposition, Boris Nemtsov, fell as yet another victim of these weapons. Nemtsova openly accuses Putin for murdering her father and warns that the Kremlin's propaganda encourages murderous attitudes not only within the country, but also towards other nations, especially the neighboring countries.
The United States, Baltic countries, Poland, they're being used as a model for creating the image of an external enemy. Having this foreign boogeyman is very important because the true enemy of Russian people lives inside the country. It's President Putin himself.
Но в глазах россиян все стоит совершенно по-другому. И есть внешний враг.
So he tries to turn it all upside down and blame everything on some foreign enemy. And there is a lot to blame. Economic and social hardships, political crisis, and so on. So he needs a constant reminder that we are fighting against some kind of external foe. And this is the main reason for all the hardships we have to endure.
In her prominent article, headlined Propaganda Kills, Zhana Nemtsova argues that the hate campaign instigated by the Kremlin is creating an unprecedented wave of uncontrollable violence in Russia.
Я имела в виду ту войну, которая сейчас
I mean the war in Ukraine. This war was started as an information war. Russia's television channels were constantly spreading lies on how the Russians in Ukraine are being oppressed.
Информацию о том, что в русскоязычных регионах Украины притесняют русских, и ведь аннексия стала возможна.
This is exactly why the occupation of Crimea was successful. People believed that the Russian-speaking population is facing true mortal danger. The trump card of carrying out historical justice was also played and used to achieve approval for this course of action.
Российскому обществу есть еще и вторая идея. То же самое было связано.
The same methods were used in starting a war in eastern Ukraine. People in Russia were so misguided that they personally enlisted to go out and kill other people.
Люди зазомбированные действительно ехали туда добровольцами, их убивали. И поэтому я считаю, что провоцирование людей.
This is why spreading hatred and provoking aggression towards other nations and consciously creating an image of external enemies is so dangerous.
Это очень и очень опасно.
The legend about local Russians being exterminated by local fascists is being created and disseminated as the main excuse for the occupation of Crimea and the war in eastern Ukraine. Recent surveys show that more than half of Russia's population are personally determined to join the military actions carried out by the government and kill Ukrainians. Ukrainian journalists put in a lot of effort to battle Kremlin's propaganda. They point out that Putin's propaganda machine employs all kinds of methods of brainwashing, from primitive lies to complex falsifications.
When you see someone talking about events somewhere in Odessa, you don't know whether he is telling the truth or not. But then you start seeing the same person posing as an eyewitness in Kiev, and then testifying as a local inhabitant in Crimea, and yet again as a refugee from eastern Ukraine. For example, one of these characters, sometimes she called herself Maria Tsepko, other times Marina Vikina or Marina Bevikina. She starred in 6 different news stories and pretended to be 6 different women. So it's not rocket science to determine that she's lying in each of these reports.
История, которую рассказала нам обитательница лагеря беженцев в Ростовской области.
Perhaps the most cynical lie, crafted by Russian propaganda, is the story about a supposed crucifixion of a local boy in Slavansk, perpetrated by the Ukrainian military personnel.
It happened in the city center, Lenin Square, the only square where it is possible to whip in a few thousand people. Soldiers scooped up every inhabitant they could find, elders, women, and children. Then they took a 3-year-old boy and crucified him on a plank. One soldier did the nailing, other 2 held the boy tightly. Everything was done before the mother's eyes. She was forced to look at how her son was bleeding. The child writhed in pain. It was impossible to watch, and people were fainting on the spot. An hour and a half later, when the poor boy died, the soldiers took his mother, unconscious at the time, tied her to a tank, and hauled it around the square.
To expose this testimony as an outrageous lie, it is enough to go to Slovansk and talk to the ever-present and omniscient babushkas living next to the central square. This is exactly what journalist Evgeny Feldman of the Russian newspaper Novaya Gazeta did.
We've never heard anything about it. It is unlikely that such a thing ever happened. The whole city will be talking about an event like that, and we live right outside the square. The whole neighborhood would know. For a start, there's no Lenin Square in Slavansk. Secondly, they don't have any square capable of accommodating several thousand people. Thirdly, these modern times we live in, everyone has a phone, a camera, or a tablet. An event like this would most certainly be recorded and uploaded online straight away. And actually, we had a lot of people in Ukraine looking for this woman, scanning social networks and their neighborhoods. The fact is, she never lived in Slavansk. She is from around Kiev.
For more than 2 years, an American journalist, Liz Wall, has worked as a reporter for the Kremlin's most active propaganda outlet, the TV news service Russia Today. Here she had a chance to experience firsthand the inner mechanics of the Russian propaganda machine.
Personally, I cannot be part of a network funded by the Russian government that whitewashes the actions of Putin. I'm proud to be an American and believe in disseminating the truth, and that is why, after this newscast, I'm resigning.
You know, why did I resign when I did? It was because I absolutely believe that not only at Russia Today, but for Russian media in general, that Ukraine was a turning point, that it actually became propagandized and used not only as a disinformation tool or propaganda. I actually think that it's used as a weapon in war. If you can get people to think a certain way, then you don't need to use as many guns. You don't need to use as many tanks. And that's what I saw when it came to Ukraine, that was actually being used as a tool, as a weapon during a war, during a bloody conflict.
After her resignation, Liz Wall spent her time actively spreading news about the methods employed by Kremlin's propaganda machine and its most significant targets. She was also summoned as an expert in the U.S. Congress Foreign Affairs Committee hearings dedicated to the weaponization of information.
And it's a problem, and we see that it's effective. We see that they are shaping the discussion online, on message boards, on Twitter, on social media.
During the session, the committee chairman, Ed Royce, stated that among the targets of Russian propaganda, the Baltic region is probably the most susceptible.
And this Russian propaganda has the potential to destabilize NATO members, and it could impact our security commitments, especially if we look at some of what's going on in the Baltic states.
So I think the message that Russia would try to reiterate and kind of target towards other ethnic Russians, especially in the Baltic states where there is a sizable Russian population, is again this narrative that Russia is there to help ethnic Russians, that they're there to keep the peace and to rescue them from whatever danger there may be. And from my experience, that danger is fabricated. And you see it across the world, wherever Russian media reaches. They try to create this divide, to try to divide Europe, to try to divide Americans, to try to divide political parties. And where there's Russian speakers, to try to divide them from the rest of society. And in populations where people tune in to Russian news and maybe identify culturally with Russia and speak the Russian language, and they're hearing this narrative from Russian news that they might be in danger. And here's Russia being intimidated and bullied by the West.
In 2014, Vladimir Putin signed Russia's new military doctrine, providing his armed forces with a legal license to operate on foreign soil to protect the lives of Russian citizens and nationals. The newspaper Rossiyskaya Gazeta, which is being officially published by the Russian government, was quick to emphasize that Russians suffering all kinds of discrimination in the Baltic states were the first to rejoice at the news.
Russian population in Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia positively reacted to the news about Russia's new military doctrine, hoping that it will cool down some heads in local governments led by militaristic nationalists.
This was the time when new legends started popping up. The new narrative was centered on the notion that the local Russian communities in the Baltics are not only being discriminated, but rather exterminated by the newly born fascist movements. Russian news agencies started spreading news about alleged plans to build new concentration camps for the Russian-speaking population in Latvia. Even children are being used. Several national TV channels in Russia reported a story of 6 Russian children allegedly kidnapped by local special forces in Lithuania and used as hostages to blackmail their parents into collaboration.
Lithuania currently holds 6 Russian child hostages. Police arrested their guardians and tried to force them into collaboration with local secret services. Adults were later set free, but the children are still being kept and their location remains unknown.
Russian politicians, like the member of Russian State Duma Yevgeny Fyodorov, are openly spreading fears that physical extermination of Russian nationals in the Baltic countries is a very credible threat.
50 years ago, all of the 350,000 people would be dragged down to a square and shot. This is the way they would solve the problem for Russian population. Today they can't. It is possible in Syria or Libya, but in Europe, so far, it is not allowed. I want to point out, so far, some time will pass and they will start killing people. When Americans will be done with Syria, they will invade Russia, and thousands of people will fall into mortal danger.
And this is the way that Russian media operates, that if you say something enough, if you create an alternate reality, and you say it enough times, that eventually it becomes part of reality, even if it's not, even if it's completely far from the truth. And I think that this is kind of a menace in new media. It's a menace in the political discourse and in journalism. And these are the rules that they play by creating this kind of disinformation chaos. And I learned a lot from being a target of it.
Mikhail Maglov is a human rights activist closely working with Russia's political opposition, and he's not afraid of being killed by Lithuanian nationalists. On the contrary, as a relentless critic of Putin's regime, he was forced to flee his own country and settle down in Lithuania. After spending more than a year in Vilnius, Maglov tells that the influence of Kremlin's propaganda can be clearly felt, especially among common Russian speakers.
The best way to understand this is to talk to the local taxi drivers in Vilnius. They are working all day long, and they spend all this time listening to the radio, predominantly broadcasting in Russian language.
Они оттуда потребляют новости. Соответственно, это формирует их картину мира.
So the point of view on what's going on in Lithuania or Russia or the whole world originates from there. So when you get in, they immediately start the conversation about politics, and they brag about the good quality of life in Russia, what a great leader Putin is, and how they despise the Lithuanian government, and adding more, the president of Lithuania. But when you start to argue, you can see that they are operating very primitive propaganda cliches that can't withstand any critique. And I usually tell them, okay, but here you can openly swear at the government and the president, and no one seems to mind. Whereas in Russia, you would be thrown in jail really fast for this. That usually does it.
Россия, Родина, ты мне близка по духу, с тобой готов я разделить печаль, но если жизнью мне придется вдруг расстаться, тебя, как мать родную, будет жаль. Ура, Россия!
Russian television and radio channels operating in the Baltics spend years trying to persuade local Russian communities that their lives are in danger. However, the majority of the people are rather skeptical about blindly supporting Putin. Nevertheless, the experts point out that it takes only a small group of hostile Russian speakers, especially living in Latvia or Estonia, to create an excuse for Russia's military intervention.
В Прибалтике ситуация вообще очень плохая в этом отношении, потому что с конца 80-х...
Situation in the Baltics is rather bad. The real problem is not the large Russian-speaking population. Many Russians are quite happy living in European countries.
Вот, то есть это не просто там этнические русские, которые стремятся стать еврорусскими, есть и такие, но...
The problem is the special kind of Russian-speaking communities, people who are descendants of personnel of Soviet occupational forces, KGB officers, and local Soviet leaders. These people are fully immersed in Russia's propaganda, and they see serving Russia's interests as the main patriotic mission. They represent themselves as true Russian patriots and an integral part of the so-called Russian world.
Соблюдение интересов России, осознают себя русскими, россиянами, частью русского мира. Значит, они существуют в совершенно ином информационном пространстве, в русском информационном пространстве. При этом...
And the problem is that it's difficult to spot them. In general, these are young people, citizens of the relative countries, they know local languages and so on. But the true identity is entirely corrupted.
Members of the famous Lithuanian pop group Biplan sing in perfect Lithuanian, although they talk to each other in Russian. During the national holidays, guitarist Alexeyev joins the group's leader, Max Melman, to do some tours around Russian schools operating in Lithuania and to lead discussions with students about national identity, patriotism, citizenship, and the like. Alex says that he was surprised to realize how big is the part of children who have already fallen victims to Russian propaganda.
Žinojome, kad mūsų pasaulėžiūra, mūsų požiūris į tėvynę gali šiek tiek...
We knew that our point of view differs, but we didn't expect such a vast disparity. They say things that they hear from their parents, from television, or their friends. These children believe that Lithuania is swarming with fascists and so on.
Lietuva tai vos ne fašistų kraštas ir taip toliau. Putinas kelia, reiškia, visą Rusiją.
They believe that Putin will make Russia the greatest country in the world and that he fights the so-called gear-up and fascism, and that Russia is the only country that stays true to justice and fights evil. On the other hand, they say that Lithuanians are nothing more than American minions. Same goes for Ukraine. And they believe this is something right for Putin to fight for. This is what they believe.
Russian media and various organizations openly funded by the Russian government work hard to make these beliefs even stronger. For a seance of even more effective brainwashing, these children are brought to special cultural patriotic camps in Russia where culture and patriotism looks like this.
Вдох, выдох, медленно, спокойно. На третьем вдохе или выдохе задерживаешь дыхание и плавно тянешь спуск.
Всякий пейнтбол, стрейкбол, стрелять из оружия намного интереснее, чем на компьютере.
If certain events start taking place, these young men would make really good separatists. I would not be surprised to learn that they are being prepared both psychologically and physically for this. I don't know where is it coming from, but darkness and ignorance prevail.
Tai įsivaizduokit, reiškia, atsiras kokie, 30 žmonių.
Imagine 30 people or so barricading themselves in a school or some kind of building, flying some kind of banner and proclaiming some new independent republic of Visaginas, let's say.
Vėliava, pavyzdžiui, caro Rusijos vėliava. Ir dabar ką su jais daryti, valdžia?
And then we have a question, what to do with them? If the police tries to disperse them, they will fight back, and Russian TV will show how Lithuanian fascists have started mass programs against Russians.
Ir tik, reiškia, jie tikrai jau ruošiasi žudyti. Blogiausiu atveju.
But what if some new members join the party, some strange men, well-armed, well-equipped, and well-trained? Then they can start escalating things towards a more intensive conflict.
Į didesnį konfliktą.
associated professor of Vilnius University, Mantas Martišius, spent more than 10 years studying the efforts to engage Russian speakers in the Baltic countries into an open conflict with the national majorities. However, he points out that ethnic minorities in the Baltic states are not so large as to present a credible threat. He says that more dangerous is the propaganda targeted at the general public.
We must ask ourselves whether Russian minority in Lithuania is rather small, and how big is the audience of Russian media? Here's your answer. Lithuanians are watching it. And I have no doubt that a lot of Lithuanians live in information space created by Russian media, and they believe everything it publishes.
Jie įsigyvena ir jiems automatiškai jie to tiki jiems.
They believe that the biggest evil is the United States, that Europe wants to enslave us, that they want to overtake our land and do kinds of bad things. And the Kremlin is the only force they can turn to for the help. That's what they believe.
Jiems taip atrodo.
The situation in Lithuania is slightly different. I don't expect local Russians to engage into any kind of hostile activities. The community is small and it is dominated by much more numerous numbers of ethnic Poles. Moreover, relationships between Russian and Polish minorities here are quite complex. On the other hand, since Lithuania is one of the loudest critics of Putin's actions and Dalia Grybauskaitė often issues some strong statements on the matter, there is only possibility of some kinds of military actions, like pulling armed forces close to the border, making open threats, and so on. I understand that people in Baltic countries are afraid. In their place, I would be too. January the 16th, 2009, Vilnius. A mass of protesters are moving towards the building of Lithuanian parliament. People demand jobs, food, and money. The police are using batons and pepper spray to hold them off. What is happening in the Baltic countries today?
Oppressed by the European Union. Lithuania in deep despair. Crisis on the outskirts of Europe. Putin's media works hard to create an image of the Baltics as countries on the verge of collapse. Every strategic project that contradicts Russia's interest in the region, be it NATO's expansion, joining the Eurozone, or ensuring the independence from Russian energy sources, instantly becomes a target for hostile propaganda.
There is no turning back now. Lithuania has announced that it will replace natural gas supplied by Gazprom with sources in Norway and Qatar, though at a double cost. It is about the trap that Lithuania has gotten itself into.
Logika yra paprasta. Jeigu tu iš Rusijos sumok, man atrodo.
The process is very simple here. We pay something like 5 or 6 billion for an energy package, gas, oil, and electricity. If we become independent, then Russia is not getting any money from us. That's why it's better for them to cause some kind of media clutter, invest some money, and bribe a few media outlets or a few people or a PR agency that could create some kind of confusion. And then all decision-making stops. Of course, they are bound to spend some 12 million euros or so, but it's nothing compared to a few billion they would get every year.
The slandering of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania is very actively exercised not only in Russia and its neighboring countries, but also on a pan-European level as well. To prove their point of view, Russian TV channels often employ all kinds of experts of questionable competence, such as former member of the European Parliament Julia Tokiesa, who has never had any connections with Lithuania and it's not even an economist.
It seems that all the process of gaining real independence has been dictated by Brussels, by the European structure, without not taking into account the real situation of the country. Very simply, it was a mistake. It was a terrible economic mistake.
In Russian media, you are going to twist the story, maybe take a fact that's there and blow it out of proportion in order to fit the Kremlin narrative. And so in that way, there isn't really any regard for the truth. It's mostly spinning. And if you spin something, and if you take a fact and you spin it so much that it doesn't reflect actual reality, well, at some point, I think it becomes a lie. And as Russian media becomes increasingly propagandized, I think that that's what it can be classified as, some of these claims, as they're lies. There's no effort there to tell the truth.
There are some Lithuanian politicians who are extremely popular with Russian propaganda. One of them is Algirdas Paleckis, a self-proclaimed fighter with fascism, which allegedly flourishes in Lithuania. He's often employed by different Russian TV channels, especially Russia Today, to comment on a wide variety of topics, from American policies in Syria to the problem of CIA prisons in Europe.
The immediate response and telling the whole truth would show that the US government and Lithuanian government are not abiding by the rules that they proclaim themselves. I mean, democracy, rule of law, non-torturing of prisoners.
Just recently, the Russian propaganda machine has discovered another friendly Lithuanian politician, Rolandas Paulauskas, who is fond of telling all kinds of stories about how Lithuania is dying out, being oppressed by the European Union.
Мы вступали не в реальный Европейский Союз, а в свою сказку.
We didn't join the European Union as it is. We joined a fairy tale we created in our minds because back then we couldn't realize what fate awaited us there.
Идет разрушение традиционных связей отцов и детей.
European Union defies traditions, family ties, relationships between men and women. Everything has changed there significantly and has been changing for decades. But our people don't want to believe the truth.
Сей день не может в это поверить.
Čia yra vėlgi, šitokie žmonės, jie rėkauja, dar kažką daro, kol kas nieko nėra. Kodėl nėra?
At first sight, this seems rather harmless for the people because they just talk and don't do anything. But that's only because of the favorable geopolitical situation we have here today.
Nuo kažkokių išorinių faktų. Vienu metu atsiranda daug problemų.
But if something happens, something we cannot directly control, something outside our sphere of influence, like if suddenly different problems around the world would merge into one world-scale disaster, then these politicians would emerge and point out that they were warning people for years. Then they would become dangerous, because they might be used to shift geopolitical orientation of the whole country.
Shifting Lithuania's geopolitical orientation to the opposite direction is one of the main tasks pursued by the Russian propaganda. The situation in the Baltic countries is being portrayed as highly explosive. The Kremlin is eager to create an illusion that only a few mistakes could propel all three countries into an explosive and massive social unrest.
Большинство сообщений, по сути, являются на 99% ложью.
Most of these reports are 99% false. For example, when the Soviet sculptures on the Green Bridge were taken down, Russia's first national TV channel immediately claimed it to be an ideologically motivated anti-Russian gesture.
Про то, что вот, значит, их демонтировали, что это идеологическая составляющая, что это вот, значит, против России, и сообщается то, что
that threatens to spill out in riots, and it was completely not true. Of course, there is an opinion that they shouldn't have removed these statues, but in reality, there were no signs of any public protests whatsoever.
То, может быть, не стоило демонтировать, но уж точно это не грозит никакими протестами.
Since 2009, Russia failed to provoke any real protests on a sufficient scale in Lithuania. Nevertheless, the propaganda machine has been employed to create an illusion that such protests are imminent. For this kind of task, Putin turned to the most powerful and most democratic media channel, the internet. In Russia, it was the last free speech stronghold to fall.
2011 год.
In 2011, when Putin returned to the president's office, internet was the place where all the evidence of mass falsification of the election results surfaced.
Активно раскручивали студии, это продвигали всячески. После этого произошли
It was free to anyone to read and to share. That's why so many people went out to the streets. And the government understood that the internet is the only place where people are free to share information and it can be controlled by the regime. That's why they devised a plan to take over the internet as well. They already controlled TV and print media. It was time to control the internet.
For a few moments, let's return to the incident in the United States, where unknown perpetrators tried to cause a mass panic by creating a hoax about a devastating explosion in a local chemical plant. Hundreds of posts in social networks, fake photos and videos, fake press releases, and even a fake CNN webpage were created. Investigating authorities followed a digital trail left by the perpetrators of this attack. It led to Russia, to a very specific place and a very specific address. Lyudmila Savchuk knows very well what is happening behind the walls of this building in St. Petersburg, Russia. She was one of the independent journalists who have infiltrated this institution and revealed its truth to the world.
В Петербурге на улице Савушкина, 55, находится так называемая фабрика троллей.
Here in Savushkin Avenue in St. Petersburg, we have a secret factory of the Kremlin's internet trolls. A few years ago, it was a top-secret facility, but recently it became famous all over the world. Its employees are hired to troll the internet not only in our country, but all around the world. They employ people to write comments in news portals, work with fake accounts on social media, and create and publish fake news.
На 3 этажах комментирование СМИ, комментирование в социальных сетях, на Фейсбуке, ВКонтакте.
They make videos and images, draw cartoons, and basically create various content that can be used online.
Который востребован в интернете.
An investigation led by independent Russian journalists revealed that this troll factory employs hundreds of people who are responsible for thousands of politically biased comments written on various online resources every day. Salaries here are high, and there's no shortage of volunteers to join the team. Every day, the employees here receive special technical tasks that provide detailed instructions on which stories must be commented upon and what statements must be disseminated. This technical brief is one of numerous documents acquired by journalists working undercover in the troll factory. It names specific statements that employees must use in online discussions concerning the European Union.
The European Union is being controlled by the US, and this is the reason they can't find a common ground with Russia. Europe suffers greatly from economic sanctions imposed on Russia. The European Union is falling apart. Is living there really so good? Europeans can't think for themselves, so they are waiting for orders from across the ocean. Europe can't tell Russia what to do. They are lagging far behind.
В течение дня
During the day, trolls are being given a wide variety of tasks. Bloggers are constantly receiving a flow of news briefs, since news stories are always emerging and need to be addressed. Everything must be presented in a way that makes the Kremlin's actions look good, and this type of narrative must dominate the internet.
Именно кремлевской точкой зрения, и они делают это все свои рабочих 12 часов.
People who are responsible for writing comments are constantly moving from one news story to another, and again, they must deliver certain pre-formatted messages.
Нужно прокомментировать в нужном духе.
Perhaps one of the most massive troll onslaughts over the internet happened just after the murder of Boris Nemtsov. At the time when thousands of people went out on the streets to pay their respects to the slain opposition leader, managers of Kremlin's troll factory were issuing the following tasks.
February 28th. The main objective is to promote a hypothesis that the murder of Nemtsov was ordered by Ukrainian oligarchs because he failed to disrupt the implementation of the Minsk agreements.
The very same day, the task was carried out during a massive and well-coordinated informational attack.
There is a hypothesis that Nemtsov might have been murdered by Ukrainian oligarchs. I believe that not enough attention was paid to the possibility of Nemtsov being murdered by Ukrainian oligarchs. This version is too convincing not to be investigated. Credible sources suggest that Nemtsov might have been murdered by Ukrainian oligarchs for failing to destabilize the situation in Russia.
В тот день, когда убили Немцова, я находилась на фабрике на Савушкина 55, и...
The day Nemtsov was murdered, I was at the office. I had to work with social networks, but they told everybody to leave their daily tasks and start commenting on this news story. They wanted us to promote speculation that Nemtsov might have been the one to orchestrate his own murder, that it was Ukrainians who killed him, or the opposition was to blame, and that they did it just to make the Russian government look bad.
Что его убили американцы, что его убили украинцы, что это свои его убили только для того, чтобы очернить российскую власть и так далее.
And we wrote thousands of comments for days, and we got paid for disseminating such conspiracy theories.
Сотни и тысячи комментариев.
Одна из задач интернет-троллей – это дезинформировать. Это и публикация безумных версий.
The main goal of internet trolls is dissemination of disinformation. This is why so many preposterous versions about my father's death were created. They blamed the Ukrainians, they blamed the opposition, and they were doing everything to draw public attention away from the truth. They were trying to drown the truth in a massive flow of false information. People just couldn't tell truth and lies apart. That is what the Kremlin's internet trolls are after. Disinformation.
Это задача интернет-троллей – дезинформация.
This is yet another document leaked from the Kremlin's troll factory. Detailed instructions on creating and managing fake accounts on social networks.
First, create profiles for different psychological types of users. Join similar profiles. Second, upload relevant non-political content. Third, reach out and befriend as many real people as possible. Fourth, start uploading political messages no more than 10% of total content.
Right after these instructions were issued, pro-Russian profiles on Facebook started concealing themselves under neutral names, such as communities.info, top 10 movie mistakes, criticism of life, and even see how a 14-year-old Aussie kicked Bieber's ass. In the beginning, the content being posted here is quite attractive and politically neutral. But upon reaching a critical mass of fans, the look and feel of these profiles changes radically.
И главная задача, чем лучше ты притворишься обычным гражданином, тем лучше.
Their main goal is to pretend that they are just another person. Sometimes they create accounts under their own identity, but most often they make up a fictional character, a boy or a young girl, or a bearded man or a housewife. The main objective here is to make the character look and feel really human, and to mask any political statements under loads of attractive content.
Человечно и интересно завуалировать политические тезисы, которые они несут.
So they start their blog and fill it with some interesting facts, popular music, images of kittens, and then they would start pushing through their political agenda.
Нежненько так между этими постами вдруг появляется некий пост, написанный тоже каким-то.
They would start something like, I went to see this American film and watched them shooting each other, and then I realized how fucked up Americans are because they are allowed to carry guns and they are going to shoot each other to hell, something like that.
Fake profiles managed by Russian internet trolls attract dozens of thousands of followers and reach thousands of readers every day. Still, there is a territory where Russian propaganda is even more active. It's online news media. This is where the most heated information offensive takes place. On numerous occasions, experts have proved that the majority of pro-Russian comments in Lithuanian media is being posted by individuals working on Kremlin's payroll. A fine example of these coordinated activities is this article about Lithuanian special forces in Afghanistan. As one could expect in these cases, the majority of the comments under this article are negative.
Respect to Afghans for driving out occupants and mercenaries who came to kill and provoke hate between local people. It should be called A Team of America's Bootlickers Balls Out of Afghanistan. I don't see any reason to respect these people. They are the ones who spilled blood of local people for resisting the Yankees' orders.
Among 613 comments, more than 60% are negative. But a detailed analysis of IP addresses revealed that more than a third of these negative comments originated from just 4 computers.
Я видела, что когда выходили разоблачительные статьи про российских троллях в СМИ Прибалтики,
Sometimes articles would emerge revealing facts about the activities of the Kremlin's trolls around the Baltic media channels. And seen with my own eyes, all the trolls suddenly drop what they're doing and start commenting on that particular article, saying that it's all a lie.
оказывается, или вообще как-либо критикует политику российского государства.
And when we have some politician making a strong statement against Putin or against Russia's actions, once again, all the trolls rush into action to make it look like common people do not support this kind of view. And I can tell you for sure that when the Lithuanian president called Russia a terrorist state, the Kremlin's trolls were wreaking havoc around this statement in different countries and in different languages.
Last year, a Lithuanian public relations expert, Karolis Žukauskas, decided to check what it takes to recruit an army of local internet trolls who would agree to work for cash and disseminate Russian propaganda in Lithuania's digital space.
Tiesiog pabandžiau pažiūrėti, kaip greitai įmanoma surinkti tam tikrą kiekį žmonių, kurie...
I wondered how easy it is to persuade some people to write pro-Russian comments and how much it would cost. So, I created a fake profile on Facebook under Russian name, used Russian flag as a profile picture, just this kind of primitive stuff. I didn't want to spend a lot of time for this, so it was all very simple. Then I added some friends who were already active in pro-Russian profiles and sent out a very simple message that I represent a certain organization and I need some people who could write pro-Russian comments to Lithuanian media and that I will pay cash for the work they will do.
The results were astonishing. In less than a day, Karolis managed to recruit 6 people who were eager to be paid to blackmail their country online. 3 of them were so enthusiastic that they even sent samples of defamatory comments. The future internet trolls hesitated only after hearing that their job would be paid in rubles rather than euros. European currency apparently was much more to their liking than the Russian one. The conclusion is that if you have some spare time and spare cash, recruiting your own army of pro-Russian trolls is a very easy thing to accomplish.
It is really easy, because there's a lot of them around anyway. I'd say there are 2 types of them. Some of them are naturals, people who are just not happy with the current government or are nostalgic of Soviet times. The others are professionals, who are already doing this type of work and they are already getting paid for this. But anyway, you can easily recruit a considerable number of them and they will write anything you tell them.
Ričardas Savukinas is a prominent blogger, better known online by his pen name, Rokiškis Rabinovičius. He's one of the most active hunters of pro-Russian internet trolls. Savukinas is coordinating several secret internet groups that constantly track the activity of Kremlin's propagandists on the internet.
I believe that there might be a few dozen people in Lithuania who work on a professional level, and even more of these might be working from somewhere else, mostly from Russia. There is also a part of people who volunteer for such work and do it because they believe they are doing the right thing. But the truth is, materials they are working with are being supplied by Russian secret services, and these people don't realize that in fact they are serving Russian intelligence. So if we count volunteers, there are probably several thousands of them. But we definitely also have professionals operating in our country, and there are certainly dozens or even hundreds of them.
Savokinas constantly monitors Lithuanian digital space and says that recently he has detected a significant change in the behavior of Kremlin's trolls. He concluded that an increasing number of pro-Russian posts and comments in Lithuanian online media are being created not by people, but rather by sophisticated computer programs called spammers or bots. This is how they operate.
Let's make a table with 3 columns and put 3 different types of words in each of the column. First one could contain names such as Kubilius, Landsbergis, Šimašius. The second would contain verbs such as sold out, destroyed, robbed, and the third column would have the words like Lithuania, our country, our motherland. And then the program starts scrambling those words. And this way, a lot of quiet, comprehensive sentences can be created, like Landsbergis sold out Lithuania, Kubilius betrayed our motherland, and Šimašius robbed our country, and so on. And the program keeps spitting out different sentences every time. Imagine, if we have 20 or more words in each of the columns, we can generate thousands and thousands of sentences. And since every time the sentence sounds different, it looks like different people are commenting. So when you open some article in Delphi, for example, you get an impression everybody is against tearing down Soviet monuments, everybody wants better relationships with Russia, and that people are highly critical of the president who calls Russia a terrorist state, or that everybody hates NATO. But it's not true.
This situation is well known to journalists in Ukraine who fight Russian propaganda while the Russian army is waging war on their country. They say what Kremlin's propaganda army is trying to accomplish in Lithuania was also done in Ukraine as one of the means to make capturing the country's territory much easier.
When I hear about things like this, it seems to me that we are talking about Ukraine, because everything has already happened here exactly the same way. And I think the objective of all these activities is to facilitate capturing new territories and expanding the Russian Empire into neighboring countries. The objective is to distract Russian people from thinking about being poor and their lives being so much worse than in Europe. They are filling their heads with stories that the Russians are a great nation of conquerors, a great nation of liberators. And all this propaganda is being used to keep the Russian people under this illusion.
There is quite a number of measures employed here. One of them is discrediting the country, making it look worthless and meaningless. And that's what they are consistently trying to do, to persuade the population that this country has defied their expectations and doesn't care for its people. And then they start questioning historical cornerstones that the nation's identity is resting upon. And it's all done in order to discourage any resistance to possible invasion.
One of the main objectives of Russian propaganda is denying the very right of the Baltic countries to exist as independent states. A number of members of the Russian State Duma have even turned to the Prosecutor General's office with a request to declare Baltic independence not only illegal, but also a criminal act. And even though prosecutors refuse to open an investigation, the process of consistent negation of the right of the Baltic states to exist continues. Professor Valdas Rakutis has been closely following Russia's attempts to override the history of Eastern Europe in order to legitimize its claim on the territory. He believes that the aggressive attitude towards its neighbors is an integral part of Russia's national identity.
Aš manyčiau, Rusija laikosi ištikimai savo senos doktrinos, kad
I believe that Russian government consistently keeps up with the doctrine that Russia needs constant expansion to survive.
Žiūrėti jiems šventas temas, tai pamatytume, kad dažnai tai yra susijęs su valstybės plėtra.
If we take a look at Russia's sacred historical topics, we can see that all of them cover some kind of territorial expansion. It could be the war with Turks, war with Germans and Swedes, and similar. All golden periods of this country are directly connected with aggressive territorial expansion. It is the only way Russia is able to develop and prosper as a society. Aggression is just a part of its national DNA.
Здравствуйте. Я русский оккупант. Это моя профессия. Так сложилось исторически. Я оккупировал Прибалтику. Ее хутора я застроил заводами и электростанциями. Прибалтика делала высококлассную радиотехнику и автомобили, славилась духами и бальзамами. Меня попросили оттуда уйти. Теперь там добывают шпроты, а часть населения чистит унитазы в Европе.
For years, Russia has denied its fault in the forceful occupation of the Baltic states. It has even become the country's official policy. Russia is putting a lot of effort into totally erasing Lithuania as a country from European history, starting from the early Middle Ages. The chief promoter of these efforts is Putin's close ally, philosopher Alexander Dugin, the founder of the doctrine of modern Russian imperialism. Dugin says that Lithuania had always been a part of Russia and the Russian nation.
Our victory against Mongol hordes gave birth to two Russian states. One of them was our Russia, the Moscovian Russia, and the other one was Lithuanian Russia.
Russian historians are working hard to prove that Lithuania was always a Slavic country. They say that the Lithuanian king, Mindaugas, was a Russian Orthodox, and that all Lithuanian Grand Dukes were keeping the same faith and spoke Russian language. The main objective here is to deny the right of the modern Lithuanian state to the heritage of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania and its territory.
Today, Lithuania is a small country that has never existed before. Lithuania and Grand Duchy of Lithuania are completely different entities. Though modern Lithuania now has taken over a small part of the territory of the old state. I see it as a possible approval for upcoming occupation. Russia has always tried to argue that this territory has always belonged to the Russian Empire. They are doing this in order to justify their attempts to capture this country in front of their own people and people in the West. And they certainly hope that Lithuanians would think twice before resisting. They want the world to see their actions as some internal misunderstandings between Russian nationals, something they almost succeeded in achieving in case of aggression towards Ukraine. These efforts are consistent and certainly are expected to be profitable.
During the past 7 years, Russia's propaganda machine has claimed a number of decisive victories. It took over the media in Russia and the internet on the global scale. It has spread misunderstandings between European countries. It has alienated Russian minorities in the Baltic states, and it has undermined people's trust in their country in Lithuania. It took 2 wars initiated by Russia and the occupation of Crimea to reveal the true face of Russian propaganda. A weapon of mass destruction used actively in an information war against Europe and the West.
Конечно, это является оружием массового поражения.
Of course, it is a weapon of mass destruction. Russian television and other media works hard to distract population from real problems inside the country and generate aggressive attitude towards neighboring nations. They try to keep an average citizen in a state of constant patriotic intoxication.
Для того, чтобы человек находился в постоянном вот этом патриотическом угаре и тонусе.
To ensure this, they use very primitive means and generate predominantly negative emotions such as anger, jealousy, and hate. We should expect all the worst, and we shouldn't have any illusions. If geopolitical situations plays out favorably for them, Russia will definitely try to take over the Baltic states. Putin has spent all his years in the office to prepare for this. We should see all what's happening as it is, as an information aggression, and we should fight it with all means we've got. It's no use just talking about occasionally. We need to put all the resources we have, because today we're already fighting for our freedom, for our survival. It's really happening here and now. Russia waits for new division of the world. If anything happens to the United States, we will take over the Baltics again, one way or another, the easy way or the hard way. Alexander Dugin,